I happened to start today myself in London, where I was, but I really wanted to get back in time to introduce Dave Barry, because this actually marks a record for me. In the several years that Liz and I have owned the store, Dave is now the author that I've introduced the most. This is his third appearance in 3 years at Politics and Prose, and I don't know if that's just because Dave keeps turning out books faster than anyone else, or he just likes coming to Politics and Prose, or we just enjoy having him, or I think it's really all of the above. Anyway, his new book, Live Right and Find Happiness, although beer is much faster, is a lot like many of his previous 20 or 30 books. It's hilarious, of course, but it's also full of musings about experiences that we all can relate to, like, bracing yourself when your kid gets his or her learner's permit to drive, or worrying about being robbed on a trip, or dealing with home repairmen. And sprinkled among Dave's many observations, you'll also find occasional advice, like how to appear to rid your house of lizards, which happens to be a particular problem down where he lives in Miami. It's really, really useful stuff. Anyway, the book also reveals a very, very courageous side of Dave, because he publishes his actual high school yearbook photo, and you'll really want to see how Dave looked back then. For more than 20 years, Dave wrote a column, as I'm sure you all know, for the Miami Herald. It was a very funny column, and I used to think, what's so hard about writing a very funny column when you live in South Florida? There's such an abundance of really totally weird stuff that happens there all the time, and all you have to do is write it down. And some of this weird South Florida stuff does, again, turn up in Dave's latest book. But the book also deals with universal themes of parenthood, of relationships, and much more, and is proof, once again, not only of Dave's comic genius, but also his ability to write about almost anything and get paid for it. In a recent interview, Dave said that in high school he was the class clown and often got his classmates and even teachers to laugh. But the teachers also told him that while he was funny, he should not expect to joke his way through life. Well, he has. And Dave did also add in the interview that he's never really had a responsible job. And anyway, now it's too late. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dave Barry.
You have to take your picture because the publicity people in New York told me nobody would be here tonight. Says, wave to them publicity people. Now give them the finger. Okay, thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. No, yeah, that's how I thought I'd get them here. I can get them here. I'll just give them something. No, it's been a. Is this actually doing anything? Yeah. Or can you hear me just as well now? No. Okay, we'll do this. Better now, or. I really do appreciate you all coming out in this horrible weather. It's been plaguing me everywhere. I went to New York from Florida on Sunday on this flight that was supposed to go to LaGuardia and was delayed. And there's nothing more fun than a LaGuardia flight. People just burst into song, and everybody's very easygoing if it's delayed. And so we start with that it's delayed, and then the pilot was one of those a little bit oversharing pilots. Like, I don't want to hear the word fuel when I'm on a plane. I know it's important. I know it's part of, and lift, everything's important, but I don't want to know. I don't want to be told about it. So he starts mentioning the fuel, and we're flying around for, I would say, approximately a week in the New York area, which has 3 airports, and I put air quotes around airports because they do have TSA agents and they do have like Dunkin' Donuts, but the plane is not allowed to descend and land there. Which to me is a quality that should be incorporated into if you're going to call it an airport. So they first were like a long time we're going to land in LaGuardia, but then we can't land in LaGuardia. And then he says, I might have to speak really quickly to you later. This is So then he tells us really quickly we're going to go to JFK, and everybody's feeling pretty good about that. JFK is not that far from Newark. And then he mentions very briefly Pittsburgh. So you can imagine how much fun everybody was having now on the LaGuardia flight. And then we landed in Newark. And my theory is he only mentioned Pittsburgh so that we wouldn't kill him for landing in Newark. But anyway, I don't want to tell you my troubles. You have snow here. I came here by train, so that was okay today. It was not so bad. It reminded me of, and I have to tell this anecdote just as it was on my mind on the train. The last time I came to Politics and Prose by train from New York, I was on the same train with Ted Koppel. And Ted Koppel gets up to go to the bathroom, and he walks by me, and he recognizes me, which is very nice. And we talked a little bit, and then he goes into the bathroom. Then he comes back out of the bathroom, and he says in this booming Ted Koppel voice, "Dave Barry, you might know the answer to this." And right now, everyone is looking at us because it's Ted Koppel in the train, and he goes, "Does the poop still go right down onto the railroad track?" And I actually have another Ted Koppel anecdote, if I remember it, for later in this talk, that will relate to this book. So anyway, this is a book of essays, and it has a title that has to do with happiness, and that's only really because the publisher always insists that there be a title as if there's a theme, and there really isn't a theme. It's just I just write what I think is funny, and what interests me, and then they demand that there be a theme, and so they came up with this one, and it is vaguely connected with the book, the idea of happiness, but not really. So I just want to, if you're actually thinking that this book will help you, I don't even know why you're here, to be honest, but anyway, there's an essay in there about my daughter Sophie's 15, and according to the state of Florida, this means she now qualifies for a learner's permit to drive. And so I wrote a letter to her, is one of the essays in the book. And the point of the letter is that just because the state of Florida thinks you're qualified to drive, that doesn't mean you are. As far as I know, there's nobody that the state of Florida doesn't think is qualified to drive. And this is my joke, which I've told for many years, is like, when I first got to Miami, I thought nobody knew the law. And I now realize everybody in Miami is driving according to the law of his or her individual country of origin. But it's true. I mean, there are people you don't know. There's many different styles of driving, and then in addition to all the different cultures driving, you have a lot of seniors driving, and they're fine. I'm a senior citizen. Nothing wrong with being a senior citizen. But there are a lot of folks who I don't think they drove much during their working lives. I think they lived in New York. They took public transportation. Then they lost the vast majority of their sight and hearing, and moved to Florida and got driver's licenses, which down there come with your Happy Meal, So we have a lot of older people driving, this is a true story. Stop me if you've heard this, but it actually did happen. We actually don't stop me. I'm just going to tell it anyway. The Miami police stopped this is about 5 years ago. They stopped a 72-year-old man driving a Chevrolet Cobalt. Which that's not so weird. The police stopped a 72-year-old man driving a Chevrolet Cobalt. It's where they stopped him, runway 9, Miami International Airport. That really happened. He had burst through a perimeter gate, didn't notice that, was on the tarmac, was out there, and they didn't. And to me, that shows a lack of awareness. If I'm driving and I realize I'm tailgating a 757, I'm gonna say, "Whoa, I'm not on the expressway anymore here." But he's out there. So and then we have a lot of people, a lot of seniors. I don't mean to harp on the seniors, but I have been in cars where this was the case. They drive by what I call the seeing eye wife method. That is to say, the man drives the car because the man drives the car, okay? He's always driven the car. But he can't see anymore, which is, let's be honest, that's a component of the good driving. And so his wife, she can still see. So she sits next to him and yells at him, you know, the arrow's green, you know, no, it's yellow, no, it's up, you know. And that's how they motor around the roads of South Florida. So anyway, I write this essay to my daughter. I say, so you got all these really, you know, you've got terrible drivers out here, really bad drivers, and you will be one of them because you're a teenager, and teenagers are idiots. And I explained to her scientifically why that's true. It's not. Don't mean it in any way offensive. They shouldn't be driving cars. Teenagers, they're too stupid to drive cars, is the most scientific way I can put it. And I agree that I too was an idiot teenage driver. I drove when I was 16 years old in New York. I actually drove before that, to be honest, but I drove all around. And but I had a safety feature that my daughter doesn't have, which is I drove my mom's 1961 Plymouth Valiant station wagon. That was the safest car ever made because it was the slowest car ever made. Its maximum speed, it reached its maximum speed on the assembly line. After that was it had the same acceleration characteristics as a fire hydrant. You could stomp down on the accelerator, and I did. And about 3 days later, the Valiant would start to move. A mature tree could get out of the way of the Plymouth Valiant. So that's why. And if my daughter would drive a Plymouth Valiant, I'd be cool with it. So anyway, I have in the book a little Q&A to talk about how you should drive in Florida. I'm contrasting it to the Florida Driver's Manual, which is full of misinformation. I've read the Florida Driver's Manual. It says things like, if you're in an area where the speed limit is unmarked, you should go 35 miles an hour. Now, you do that in Miami, and you're going to take small arms fire from behind you, okay? And maybe not even such small arms fire from behind you. So I wrote a little Q&A for my daughter to explain how to actually drive in Florida. Q, how is the turn signal used in Florida? A, it is used to indicate to other motorists that you do not realize your turn signal is blinking. Q, could it also be used to signal your intention to turn or change lanes? A, interesting. Nobody has ever tried that. Q, what is the best kind of food to eat while driving? A, any food such as a sandwich, turkey leg, oyster, or ding-dong that can be eaten one-handed so that you still have a hand free for texting. Q, what if an emergency situation arises that might require me to operate the steering wheel? A, use your forehead to honk the horn until the emergency has passed. Q, my car's engine seems to have stopped and I hear a burbling noise. What could be causing this? A, are you a senior citizen? Q, yes. A, you have driven into a swimming pool. Q, I've had a few drinks. How can I tell if I should drive? A, take this simple test. Are you wearing your underpants on your head? Q, not my underpants, no. A, then you are good to go. Q, what is all that shouting? A, are you a senior citizen? Q, yes. A, you have struck a pedestrian. Not laughing so hard at that one. Anyway, I have an essay about, this is the essay that's gotten the most attention in this book so far. It's called The Real Madmen. And it's about my parents' generation versus my generation. My parents were the greatest generation, the World War II and the Depression. My mom was actually born in a sod hut, grew up in bad poverty, and I'm a baby boomer. They raised me, and I grew up in New York suburbs, the little town of Armonk, New York, during the Mad Men era in the 50s and 60s. That's when I was a kid. So I could sort of watch my parents growing up, and I was thinking about this because of the show Mad Men, which I like a lot, which shows all the smoking and drinking and extramarital sex that went on. But what I felt it was kind of lacking was the sense of fun that went on back then. I was thinking about how it was different from my generation when we became adults and parents and so on. And I don't think we had as much fun as they did. We had some fun, and that's where here's my Washington Post anecdote, and Ted Koppel anecdote, which I'm only going to tell here because we're in Washington, D.C. So get ready. No, it's not. I built it up too much already. But I was talking about like that. There was a time when I felt like kind of a party animal. Years ago, the Washington Post used to have Katharine Graham used to host this party for cartoonists, and the only two non-cartoonists invited to the party were Ted Koppel and me, and everybody else was a cartoonist. And it was a fun party. It was a small party at the Washington Post building. A lot of drinking went on. And they always invited some politician to it, but everybody would do little skits. It was kind of a silly party, and then the politician would try to do something amusing. One year it was Dick Cheney. He was then the Secretary of Defense, and what happened was I had a few too many alcoholic beverages, and thought I was very funny. Much funnier than I actually was. And I by mistake, I don't know if this ever happened to you, I introduced myself to him and toward the beginning of this is like only like maybe 24 people, so a small gathering. I introduced myself at the beginning, and then like maybe 10 minutes later, I kind of forgot, and I bump into him, and I introduced myself to him again. And he shakes hands with me, and we both kind of laugh because we realize we've already done this, okay? So, okay, that's great. That's as far as it should go, right? I thought it was hilarious. So maybe 3 minutes later, I bump into him again, this time on purpose, go, Dick, Dave Barry. And he kind of like, and then I did it 2 more times, okay? So he's not amused at all. He's like wishing he brought his sniper with him, you know? But anyway, that is sort of an anecdote I tell, talking about like, okay, there were times in my life when I partied, but really the truth was that after I became a parent, I stopped really partying hard. I mean, just didn't anymore. Became like everyone else who was a parent. You get kind of focus your life on your child and you become more serious. But I thought back to my parents when they were the same age I was and older, when they were into their 30s and 40s. I watched that generation. My dad rode the train to New York every day with other parents, other dads from Armonk, and they were advertising executives and stockbrokers. They were success, but they were like, when the weekend came, they partied. They had gigantic cocktail parties that rotated from house to house, sometimes our house, sometimes other house, every Friday and Saturday night. And they had like theme parties. They danced, they sang, they did skits, they had scavenger hunts, they did all kinds of stuff. And I thought, we didn't do that. We all stopped doing that. We became like much more focused on being kind of serious parents, and you know, that kind of thing would have struck us as silly and inappropriate for our behavior. We didn't have the kind of fun they had. And I tell a story one day. This is back probably late 50s, early 60s, after a party at our house, and so like there's still smoke billowing out of the house, and you know, glasses and bottles everywhere, and my brother Phil comes into my room and goes, "There's 2 giant bees in the living room." And I thought he meant like insect bees. And so I go in the living room, and there are 2 letter bees. They're made out of wood, and they're painted gold, and they're like this tall in the living room of our house. And it was a scavenger hunt. And the IBM Corporation at that time was building its world headquarters in Armonk, and they had erected 2 gigantic signs. And apparently, because my parents, the initial was B, the scavenger hunt, one of the items was to get the B from, and 2 people succeeded, probably like stockbrokers or whatever, stole the IBM signs and brought them to our house. I'm sure, you know, to this day, I don't know if the IBM company, you know, knows where they went, but we had them. But I guess my point of that this essay is, when I think back on it, they had more fun. They didn't worry so much. They didn't worry about when we played, where we played. There's like, go away, play, come back by July, you know? They just didn't worry. And they ate gluten. They ate gluten on purpose, you know? So anyway, that essay has actually gotten a lot of attention, some of it good, some of it bad. Some people think I'm a really irresponsible person that thinks people should go drink, which, you know, fine, think what you want. I have an essay called "Bite Me, David Beckham." And This essay is based on my insecurity as a person. You mentioned this in your introduction. I'm insecure about how I look. I have been for my entire life. Your image of how you look is formed when you're a kid, middle school, high school. Here's my high school yearbook photo. Oh, those of you saying I'm cute now, you lying bitches. Where were you when? That was what this is really, and this is like not a bad day. This is the best I could look in 1965. Thank you, Steve. Notice the Soviet Union eyeglasses. Notice the haircut, and you know how you don't just get a haircut like that at random. You get a haircut like that when your dad cuts your hair. We didn't have a lot of money. My dad cut my hair. He was a Presbyterian minister. He was an excellent Presbyterian minister, highly trained Presbyterian. They do not train them in hair cutting. And I know that we want to get the assault rifles out of the hands of American people, but first we should get electric clippers out of their hands, is my feeling. So anyway, that's why I looked. And I read about how I was an insecure kid, and then I just read you a little part from this. Anyway, my point is that in high school I was not physically attractive to the opposite sex, namely girls. But Dave, I hear you remarking, looks aren't everything. There are plenty of other qualities besides cuteness that girls look for in boys. Good point. And when I say good point, I mean you are a stupid idiot. The girls of Pleasantville High School were not interested in plenty of other qualities besides cuteness. I know this because I had plenty of other qualities besides cuteness. Sarcasm, for example. I had a black belt in sarcasm. I went entire years without ever saying anything that was not basically the opposite of what I actually thought. Also, I could make realistic farting sounds with my hands. These are just two of the many qualities other than cuteness I had in high school. None of them impressed girls. You will never hear a high school girl say about a boy in a dreamy voice, "He's so sarcastic." So the David Beckham element comes into it because my wife, Michelle Kaufman, is a sports writer. She's a sports writer from Miami Herald, and she covers soccer. She's international soccer. She goes to the World Cup. And it happens that David Beckham is trying to start a professional soccer team in Miami. So he's wooing Miami. He's around all the time. He's like mowing your lawn. David Beckham is out. And he's a very attractive man, I'm told, by many people, mainly my wife. And among the people he's wooing the press and the politicians, but the number one press media person in Miami for soccer is my wife. So David Beckham calls her up. David Beckham wants to go to lunch with her. David Beckham calls her Michelle and hugs her when he sees her. And the worst part of it is she tells me he's really a nice guy. I don't want him to be a nice guy. I want him to be a shithead. But anyway... So there's an essay about that, like the agony of dealing with that. Related to that, there's an essay about soccer. I love soccer. I'm a big fan of soccer. I know most Americans aren't. I am, partly because my wife, over the years, have gone to the World Cup. My daughter plays soccer. She plays club soccer, which is, I don't know if you've been involved with club soccer, but basically the way it works is every weekend you drive 200 miles, minimum, to play against another team that has also driven 200 miles. Sometimes they started out where you did. And the reason for this is, by law, the game has to be played where there's a chance somebody will be killed by lightning. There has to be heavy thunderstorms in the area. You cannot play club soccer. If we ever really get serious about ending the drought in California or sub-Saharan Africa, schedule a soccer tournament there. And it will rain. It'll rain for weeks. But anyway, I talk about soccer, why I love it, why Americans don't like it. I have a long list of the complaints Americans have. One of them is this. Whenever players collide with something, such as another player, a tallish blade of grass, or an unusually dense patch of air, they try to draw a foul call by hurling themselves dramatically to the turf, grabbing a random knee, it's always a knee, and adopting the agonized facial expression of a man being castrated by irate lobsters. Not to single out any specific nation, but there are Italian players who spend enough time lying on the ground to be biologically classified as zucchini. I have an essay about, that's a whole essay involving Brazil, the country of Brazil. We went to Brazil for the World Cup, and I love Brazil, but I was scared to go there. I live in Miami, and I know Brazilians, and I know a lot of people who've been to Brazil. And when I said I'm going to Brazil for the World Cup, they all said the same thing. Everybody, no exceptions. They said, "What a great country! Do not wear jewelry." Or you're going to love it. Take some money to give them when they show you the knife. Okay, and the guidebooks say this too. Like knife point robbery is very common in Brazil. You should, it's good to like keep your real money hidden somewhere and then have a little wad of money to give them when they try. So when we got there, I was like the Michelin man I had money concealed all over my body. I had bought garments with secret pockets, and I had a lot of money on me. And I'm walking around with money, but I had this wad ready to give them if a knife point. And it never happened. It never, ever happened. And then we were not always in good neighborhoods. Nobody ever tried to rob us. And my daughter and I eventually we sort of became a joke. And we decided that you can make a good living. If you were a college student, say, go to Brazil and rob Americans. Seriously, they're ready to give you the money. If they've been reading the same books I've been reading, as soon as they get off the plane, they're ready to hand somebody some money. Just show them a knife. Just show them a receipt for a knife, and they will give you the money. Then I have an essay about home. It's called "Everything I Learned About Home Ownership I Learned from Johnny Carson," and this is a true story. The first time I was ever on television was. I had written a book, this is in the early 80s, called The Taming of the Screw, which is a parody of a do-it-yourself book published by Rodale Press. And I had never been on television. I had never been on a book tour. And somehow, somebody at the Tonight Show got a hold of this. It was a producer named Shirley Wood, this old battle axe broad, kind of a legend at the Tonight Show. Calls me up at home and says, "I got your book. It's pretty funny. Are you funny?" That's the way she said. That's a very good Shirley Wood imitation. And she sounds a little more masculine than that, actually. She's gone now. But anyway, so she decided after our conversation to fly me to L.A. to be on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, my first time ever on television. So I get flown to L.A., I get picked up at the airport, taken to the studio. They take me backstage. There is my dressing room with my name on it, Dave Barry. Next to it, the Pointer Sisters. And I go, wow, this is like amazing. So I'm sitting there all alone in my dressing room. I have nothing to do. And Shirley Wood comes in. "Hi, you remember what we talked about? Drink this." And then she gives me wine, not a little dainty wine glass. She gave me a water glass full of wine and said, "Drink this." Really? And I did. And I went out onto Tonight Show. I was the last person on, 7 minutes. It was called the author spot. If they had room left over at the end, the author went on. That night, I did. And it was great. It was fantastic. I killed. The audience was laughing. And I thought, wow, television, it's easy. Later, I realized after maybe 1,000 horrible interviews that the reason it was great, it was that I had the best interviewer ever. I had Johnny Carson, who was a master at making you look good. That was his great skill. And so it was wonderful. But anyway, at the end of the show, we do the last joke, and the audience laughs, and Johnny says good night. The camera goes off. The band is playing. He lights a cigarette immediately, turns to me. It's the only conversation that we had that was not on the air. And he goes, "I used to do it yourself. You can't do shit yourself." That was Johnny's. And he was right. At least in my case, I've been a homeowner for many, many years now, and I have tried to do things myself, and I can't. I'm not good at it. And I now use what I call the guy with the truck method. Call a guy with a truck to come to your house. And I describe in the book how that process works. And it's not a pleasant process. Those of you who have lived through it, it's especially not pleasant if you're me, if you're a humor columnist and your job is to sit at home looking at it, most of the day, looking at stuff on the computer that doesn't appear to have anything to do with anything useful, like a Japanese game show or something. That's my job. That's what I'm doing all day. But it doesn't look right to a guy with a truck. You know what I mean? So they come, you call them because you have a problem. There's something wrong with your house. You don't want to know what it is. You don't know how to fix it. That's why you called him. And he always has questions, which is one of the things I hate. I always want to ask you some questions. And I think, well, if I knew the answer to the questions, why would I have called you, the guy with the truck? But he'll always say, can you tell me, Mr. Barry, can you tell me where your differentiation module is? It should be by the Boolean overpass valve, I don't know where that is. I goes, I don't know. And then he's looking at the screen with the Japanese game show, you know. Then he goes off to whatever they do. And then the really bad part comes, which is when they come back to you after they've done whatever looking around they do, and they want to show you something. You know what I mean? Homeowners know what I'm talking about, right? Mr. Barrett, can I show you something? I want to show you something. And I don't want to see it. I mean, I reached the point in my life where I say, no, you can't show it to me because I won't understand it anyway. But anyway, you go look, and it's never good. You know, it's never like, he never goes, see this here? That's exactly the way that should look. That's not going to cost you a nickel. You know, that's never what it's always like something horribly wrong. And you always want to say, well, I bet a guy with a truck did it, you know, whatever it is. So I propose in the book, because people believe that they can do things themselves. And they believe this because of Home Depot and Lowe's, which run these commercials where these, you know, it's happy homeowner couple. They're in Home Depot. They're looking at tile samples. That's scene one. And then there's a 3-second montage of them wearing safety glasses and screwing a screw. And then new kitchen. You know, it's a whole new kitchen. And you're like, no, that is not happen. It's never going to happen that way. You don't get a new kitchen by screwing something in. That doesn't, you know. And so I propose in the book a company I call, it's like the anti-Home Depot. It's called reality-based hardware. And the idea is you would go to reality-based hardware and propose a do-it-yourself project, and they would talk you out of it. That would be the function. So I have a dialogue between a homeowner and a reality-based hardware employee. Homeowner, I want to install a ceiling fan. Employee, really? Homeowner, yes. Employee, you want to install a machine with long, sharp blades whirling at high speeds directly over the heads of live human beings? Homeowner, well, yes. Employee, I see. And do you have any particular expertise in this area? Any training in the field of ceiling fan installation? Homeowner, no, not in ceiling fan installation per se. Employee, in what then? Homeowner, I'm a dentist. Employee, I see. And would you be comfortable having a professional ceiling fan installer give you a root canal? Homeowner, well, no, but that's a different. Employee, I'd like you to take a look at this photograph of a recent do-it-yourself ceiling fan installation. Homeowner, my God, is that? Employee, yes, his hand. It landed 8 feet away. I have an essay in here about a trip I took last fall to Russia. I went to Russia with a friend of mine, an author, Ridley Pearson. We were sent to Russia by the State Department, our State Department, as part of a program where they send authors to Russia to improve relations between the two countries. So that's working out pretty well. They're going to send me to Iran next, maybe. Now, we went over there. It was really interesting. I can't say I understood much of what was going on, or that I learned. It was interesting. Let me put it that way. And the Russians we dealt with, for the most part, were pretty nice. My one piece of advice that I've learned coming back from Russia, I pass along, is if you go to Russia, do not eat the Mexican food. One night, we decided to try Mexican food in Moscow. I don't know what it was close to the hotel. I think that was the main reason. And I ate, I think it was a weaponized chimichanga, and developed, I don't want to get too explicit, but I developed a case of global thermonuclear diarrhea. And so it's really don't eat the Mexican food in Russia. Don't eat it in Mexico really either. I have in the book a letter to my grandson. I became a grandfather last year. My son Rob, well, actually it was his wife who had the baby, Dylan Maxwell Berry. So I'm a grandfather now, and I wanted to write a letter to him, and expressing what I felt I've learned over the years. It was fun becoming a grandfather. The one thing is, it didn't kind of exactly work out the way I expected. because when you picture yourself being a grandfather, you picture certain activities the granddad and grandson are going to do together. And I didn't really think about this, but the first activity we did together involved his bris. Yeah. My son married a Jewish woman. I married a Jewish woman. My wife is Jewish. She's Cuban Jewish, Juban, they call them. My joke is they didn't come on rafts. They parted the Caribbean. But so Rob married a Jewish woman, and they have in the Jewish tradition a thing called the bris. For those of you unfamiliar with it, on the 8th day of a newborn male's life, they circumcise him, and then they have deli platters, sometimes on the same surface. And so I was told I would be part of this, the bris, and so I love Judaism. It's a wonderful religion. I'm not nuts about the bris thing. So I looked it up in the Bible to see why they do this, because it seems, to be honest, seems savage. And it sure enough is in the Bible, it's online, the Bible, if you want to look it up. And there's this, it's very clear, very explicit. Abraham, who's the patriarch of the Jewish people, God comes to him, which is never a good thing. Nothing against God, but it's kind of like when the truck guy comes and wants to ask you a question, show you something. It's never like a fun reason. God never says, hey, I turned Lake Erie into beer. Hey, it's always like God wants you to smite somebody or sacrifice somebody or collect 311 goat skins, God has some bee in his bonnet, and so in this case, God tells Abraham he's going to be the patriarch of this wonderful people. He's going to be the forebearer of his ancestors will be kings. He's going to get the land of Canaan, which is the biblical term for what we now call Long Island. But he says, as a token of this covenant, as a sign of this agreement between him and God, he wants Abraham, who is 99 years old. 99 years old, this guy. He wants him to circumcise himself and everyone in his household. And I'm thinking, why would that be the token of this covenant? Why couldn't you just shake hands? And speaking of shaking hands, picture 99-year-old man coming towards you. You're a member of the household. Hey, guess what God told me to do? So anyway, I was chosen to be the Sandek, which is it's an honor, I'm told, to hold the baby's legs during the circumcision, while the moil, which is the Hebrew word for snipper, does his part. So that's what I did. I was the Sandek for my grandson's bris, that's not what I pictured. I pictured us going fishing. So anyway. But I wanted to write an essay, a letter, telling him what I have learned. And this was actually true. I really thought, I'm going to try to think of the wisdom I have acquired in all my years, something that I really believe, that I know is true, that I would pass along to another generation. And the only thing I was really sure of was that you don't need to refrigerate ketchup. Or mustard. You don't. How many people here keep your ketchup in the refrigerator? Okay, you're idiots. When you go into a restaurant, where's the ketchup? It's on the table. It's not in the refrigerator. It's been there for decades. Nobody gets sick, okay? So I pass that along. Anyway, so that's basically the book. Although there are a few other things in there, but I'm not going to go into them. So anyway, we have time for questions, right? Yeah. Go ahead. Thank you. I wasn't fishing for applause. I was really asking if we had time for questions.
But can we ask, if you have a question, make it to that mic or that mic, because we're recording.
Oh, we're recording. Okay. Well, if you have a question or a problem at home you wish to share with the group, please go to the microphone. Nobody has any questions. Yes. Go to the microphone, didn't you? Oh, it's right there. You're there. You don't have to go anywhere.
And here's one over here.
We'd like you to go to this one over. No, you're good.
Not to embarrass you,
Okay.
but I'm from Brazil. What else did you like there?
What? What did I like about Brazil?
Yeah.
All right, can I be really honest here about one of the things I really like about Brazil is the bathing suits. I discussed this with my wife when we got there. It's like any one of her bathing suits would have been enough for all the other Brazilian women. They do not. God bless them, those Brazilian women. And it's not. I'm not saying they're all hot, because they're not. I mean, there's just a range of. But man, they do not particularly feel a need to not show you everything that they. You know what I mean? I like that a lot. No, and the people were great. The people were. And what's that drink? The caipirinha. Oh my God, that's a good drink. I'm very fond of this. You sit on the beach in Brazil, and you don't have to go anywhere. People keep coming up to you. They'll sell you a bathing suit. There's a guy walking around. No, I'm not kidding. You could buy, I bought 8 or 10 bikinis while I use them as eye patches. They're very, very small. No, they come around. They'll sell you stuff, and the people are so sweet. And also, nobody seems to be working. I mean, how does the economy work in Brazil? Or maybe it was just because the World Cup was going on. But I loved Brazil. I would go back in a minute. It was fun. It's also Rio. I was just in Rio, but what a beautiful country. City.
I guess they would understand your humor.
You think they would? Okay. Well, the woman who cuts my hair now is Brazilian, so she must have a sense of humor. Yeah. It's Miami. You have to go to Miami. It's worth it, though. Anyway, yeah. Any other? Yeah.
Well, that last part actually answered my other question, which was, what do you put in your hair, and can I have some? But
I get more grief about my hair. I actually had my hair this morning. I was on a TV show in New York, taping a TV show, and they take you to the makeup, and I go, leave the makeup place, and I come by, and then I walk by the hair lady, and she goes, "Do you want me to do your hair?" And I go, "No, I'm good." She goes, "No, you're not." So anyway.
well, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask a semi-serious question, but no response. Well, I'm, in my 20s, I sort of discovered your work, combing through my parents' bookshelf, who are huge fans. And I heard a rumor recently, actually, that you got your start at my local paper, the Daily Local News.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sort of curious if you could talk a little bit about, why it just actually seems like an unusual path to start as a local beat reporter and then go into humor writing, and sort of what took you along that path.
It's absolutely true. That my first job in the newspaper business was at the Daily Local News in Westchester, Pennsylvania, which is a little daily. I don't know if it's still a daily paper.
Yeah.
Anyway, daily, except unless you count Sunday as a day. They didn't. But it was like a typical small town paper. I think it was 30,000 circulation. This is in the early 70s. And kind of when I say small town, we actually ran a headline once, "Woman beats off would-be rapist." That while I was there, that happened. But it was I tell everybody, don't go to journalism school, and I apologize to anybody who's in journalism school or journalism teacher, but I learned everything about journalism that mattered in 2 months at the Daily Local News. I went to fires, I wrote obituaries, I covered meetings, I covered basketball games. You do everything, and if you screw up, you immediately find out in a small town. They call you up and tell you. So I learned how to do the basic things. But the beauty of it was that you could do other things while you were there. So I wanted to write a humor column. I always wanted to, but that was not what they were paying me for. But you could, we'd done anything with everything else. So I started to write a weekly humor column. And I'll never forget, I wrote my first one. I thought it was pretty funny. I wrote my second one. I thought it was pretty funny. I wrote my third one. It's pretty funny. After my third one, it happened that night was the night of the Christmas party. Back then they had Christmas parties. That's probably not legal anymore, but that's what they called it at the Daily Local News. So I'm at the Christmas party, and the woman who edited my column, Hannah Gardner, came up to me. We both had a lot to drink, and she goes, your column, you used to be funnier. which I have heard for the last 40 years that I'm used to be funnier, so I'm now used to it. But anyway, I kept writing it, and I'll make a long story short. I left the daily local news, and I started teaching effective writing seminars, but I kept writing my column, and I tried to get it into various newspapers. Then a fellow sitting right there, Gene Weingarten, raise your hand. Had started running my columns in the Miami Herald and offered me a job, and then I became a full-time humor writer. But I don't know that there isn't any path to be I don't think. People ask, well, how do you do? I don't know. I was in my 30s when I was became a full-time humor writer. I don't know how you would go do it. If you couldn't do it the way I did anyway, because they don't use humor in newspapers really anymore the way they used to. So it has to be some other path, and I don't know what that path is. I just kind of feel like if you keep writing and it's people like it, eventually somebody will figure it out. Yeah.
So I'm also a huge fan of soccer, and I've seen it in various countries around the world. And I'm wondering, what's it going to take for Americans to like soccer? This was amazing to me. I just found out that one of the sticking points about this year's MLS season was that the entry-level salary for a soccer player was $36,000, whereas it's like hundreds of thousands in the NFL, and I could hardly believe it. So what's it going to take for Americans to get into soccer?
Nothing. They never will. No, I'm kind of over it. I think it's a wonderful sport. I really do, and I try to explain in the book why I think it's such a wonderful sport. But it's like anything. It's like some people like opera. I don't get those people, and they could explain to you why it's brilliant and difficult, and but I don't like it. So I think with sports, it's fine. It's okay. It turns out that most of the world really does like soccer, so you don't have to worry about whether Americans do or not. Americans like shitty beer. Nothing can be done, Anyway. Yeah.
Hi, I saw that the Rock Bottom Remainders are reuniting this month in Tucson.
Yeah.
I was curious. I know that's the first time in a while. I was curious if that might lead to any further touring, say at book festivals in the D.C. area.
I don't know. The only reason we're reuniting in Tucson is because the Tucson Book Festival basically agreed to pay to fly everybody there. Because that's usually the sticking point. When people always say, hey, come and be the band here. But then we say, well, you got to get everybody there, and then you got to rent equipment, and then you got, So then they go, oh, we're not going to do that because we're not worth it, But I was thinking the other day, this anecdote popped up in my mind, because people are always asking, like, what is it like? You're in the this band of authors, and what do you talk about, and I think people envision us like sitting around having literary discussions, and we really don't. My favorite discussion involving the Rock Bottom Remainders, maybe 5-6 years ago, we were on the tour. We actually came through to D.C. and then went to New York, and then we went to Boston. And in New York, after we played, as is our tradition, we go to a bar. We do that way more than we practice. Is it part of our problem? So we are in a bar, and we're at this long table, everybody's sitting there, and I'm sitting between Roy Blunt Jr. and Scott Turow on either side, and I'm drinking vodka gimlets, which turns out to be an important part of this story, and maybe a few too many vodka gimlets. And Roy Blunt Jr. is, I think, the funniest human being in the world, and I'm listening to him talk, and I'm just laughing. But Scott Turow is telling this really kind of intense anecdote involving his spleen. And it involved losing a spleen, not having a spleen. But I wasn't clear whether he had a spleen or not. But that was key to the story. So I would listen for a little while, and then I would ask Scott, do you have a spleen or not? And he'd go, no, I don't. That's the point. I don't have a spleen. And okay. And then I'd start listening to Roy again for a while, and Roy's very funny. I'm listening, and then I'd sort of hear the Scott Turow conversation again, and in my gimlet fogged mind, I would go, "Oh, this is kind of interesting," but I couldn't remember if he had a spleen or not. So I asked him. It was kind of like the Dick Cheney thing, but it was not intentional. And I said, "So do you have a spleen?" And he goes, "No, I don't have. I told you I don't have a spleen." Then back to Roy, and then the third time, I come back to Scott and the spleen, and he's really pissed off now, and he pulls my shirt up and gets a felt tip marker and writes "no spleen" on my arm. So, okay, couple more gimlets, we go to bed. Everybody goes to bed. I wake up the next morning because we have to catch a train to Boston. And I'm stumbling across the hotel bed, room, and I'm going to the bathroom, and I walk by the mirror, and I see there's something on my arm. And I look at it, and it says, no spleen. And I have no memory at all of why. And then, like they say there's these organ harvesters. And you wake up in a bathtub, and you have no kidney. But this is how hungover it was. It took me a couple of seconds to figure out that I didn't, had no incisions anywhere, although I'm not really that sure where my spleen is. But then I realized, spleens are useless. People take them out all the time. People take them out for recreational purposes, Nobody would harvest a spleen. You'd have to be a moron, Be like, among spleen harvesters, that's like a big insult. He'd harvest Gorgon, he'd harvest a spleen. Never mind, there's a joke in there somewhere. But anyway, so that's kind of the Remainder's experience, more so than the music, is really what I'm getting at. We do it because it's fun to get together, but we're looking forward to Tucson. A bunch of the best. Scott will be there, and Mitch Albom and Greg Isles, and Amy Tan, who's got a whole new wig. So I think I should take maybe one more or no more if there's nobody. All right, we're done. Hey, thank you. Wait. What?
Because one of the other great chapters of the book is about the Google glasses.
Oh yeah.
Right. And you were telling me that that you actually went to Google.
I went to
Google.
Google. Google headquarters. I'll read you the part I read to them. I went to Google headquarters in New York City as part of this the book tour. And Google, I don't know how they do it. They have this giant building, and it's full of snacks. It's millennials and snacks. And the millennials are walking around holding computers in their hands, but they're not working. They're just walking around. I think that the way Google works is in the basement, there's a computer, probably this big, that does Google. And the rest of it is just people snacking and carrying. But wait, where is it? Oh, here we go. Okay. This is what I read to them about why I didn't like their I bought a pair of Google Glass and wore them for a while. And it was, I'll read you this. And I'm trying to establish that I'm big on technology. And I go, the point is I consider myself to be pro-technology and knowledgeable about gadgets. So when I heard about Google Glass, I wanted it. I wasn't sure exactly what it did, but I knew it was new and it apparently involved electricity. It also involved Google, of which I'm a huge fan. Google has basically replaced my brain. There was a time when if somebody asked me a question, say, who is Socrates, I had to manually think about it. Whereas now I just Google it and boom, I have an answer. An ancient dead person. Google makes thinking so much easier. If Google had existed when I was in college, I would have spent the entire 4 years getting high and listening to Moby Grape instead of just 87% of the time. So anyway, I got Google Glass. It cost $1,500, which sounds like a lot of money until you realize that it's 100% tax deductible if you write about it in this book. What is Google Glass? It's a lightweight electronic device, sort of like a high-tech looking eyeglass frame without lenses that you wear on your head. On the front right side of the device is a tiny camera and a miniature screen that you can theoretically see with your right eye. There's also a tiny microphone and speaker. It connects wirelessly to the internet through Wi-Fi or a Bluetooth phone. So basically, when you put on Google Glass, you are wearing a tiny, hands-free computer with direct access to the unimaginably vast information resources of the internet. Think for a moment about what this means. It means you look like a douchebag. Seriously, you do. There is no getting around it. My daughter, who has been my daughter for her entire life and therefore has developed a very high tolerance for being embarrassed by me, refused to walk into a restaurant with me until I removed my Google Glass. If you go to the official Google website for Google Glass, you will see photos of attractive young people wearing Google Glass as they engage in a variety of modern youthful activities: biking, running, golfing, chopping organic vegetables, etc. Google has enough money to buy whatever it wants. Asia, for example. So you know they paid for the absolute best-looking photos of the absolute best-looking glass-wearing individuals money could buy. They still look like douchebags. So anyway, I read that. I courageously read that to the Google people, but they actually agreed with me, so it was cool. Anyway, I really appreciate you guys coming out on a horrible night. Thank you. Appreciate it.
So Dave's